Soil texture is a very important soil property. Soil texture is comprised of 3 different sizes of particles, and they are sand, silt, and clay. Sand is the largest, silt is medium-sized, and clay is the smallest. Now this ball represents sand. Yeah, as you can see, it's kind of large, and it is, in this case, it's a sphere, but in reality, sand particles are round shaped, but they tend to be a little more irregular than just a sphere. This small ball represents a silt particle. Similar shape to the sand, however, it's much, much smaller. This piece of paper represents a clay particle. Now you can see if I hold it this way, it's fairly broad, but if I turn it this way, it's very, very thin. And that's why we call them clay plates. Okay, so the clay particles are shaped like sheets of paper, and we call them plates. Now generally in a soil, you can find silt and sand particles on their own. However, with clay particles, they tend to appear as a stack. Okay? And that stack is a bunch of clay particles all piled on top of each other and stuck together using chemical bonds of some sort or another. Now, what's interesting about clay particles, and one of the things that gives clay particles some of its interesting properties, is that clay will shrink and swell. And so the clay particles can actually get further apart or closer together. And so if something large gets between the clay particles, like this ball, let's see if I can do this, like this ball, okay, it pushes the clay particles a long way apart. If something small gets between the clay particles, like the silt, like this smaller ball, the clay particles are a lot closer together. Now, what can get between clay particles? Clay particles can have water get between them, and it can have ions get between them. And if you have a large ion, it pushes the particles apart, and if you have small ions, it pulls them together. With water, what happens is water will get between layers of some clays and force them apart, and then when they get forced apart, the volume of soil actually gets bigger, and so the soil swells. As water leaves from between clay particles, clay plates, the particles get closer together, the volume of the soil decreases, and the soil shrinks. And that's why we get cracking in the middle of summer, is the soil shrinks because water disappears and the clay particles get closer together. Now, soil texture comprises of the different sizes of particles, but those particles are very specific in nature. They are mineral particles. Okay, so when we're talking about soil texture, we're only talking about the minerals that are found in the soil. We're not talking about the organic matter at all. We're only talking about the soil minerals. This is a jar of sand-sized particles, and you can see that they flow over top of each other very, very easily. They're almost big enough to see individual particles, even on the screen. In real life, it is very easy to see the individual particles because they are so large. They flow across each other very, very easily, indicating that they are pretty much round in shape. This is a jar of silt-sized particles that the structure's been destroyed in, and you can see that the silt-sized particles themselves they're very small, difficult to see, but they do flow and roll across each other, indicating that they are round.